All right, brother. How goes, man?
Pretty good. It's Wednesday, Pat, so it's a jiu-jitsu day. And good session. Good session today. Fun session. Got a lot of new people in the gym these days, and it's always nice to show some people the ropes. So it's good. Good day.
Is there any hazing of new people in jiu-jitsu? And
You
that's probably
know,
a word which invokes litigation, but is there anything along those lines?
called assault, Pat, and
It's called the 1980s Welcome Aboard.
uh, you know, it's like anything where you can find a myriad of cultures present. And you can find some crusty old school gyms where they're going to be pretty rough on the new people. And you can find some places that honestly are probably not hard enough. And it's balanced. I think just like a CrossFit gym, where if you have somebody that comes into the gym and they're a previous college athlete and they know what hard training looks like, sometimes that's going to look a little bit different on their day one than the person who's been riding a desk for 20 years and hasn't done anything strenuous since the
Hmm.
80s. That's a different entry point, and it's much the same with jujitsu. When you have somebody who's fresh and they've never done anything like that before, they've never experienced somebody else in their physical space, well, you got to treat that a little differently than somebody who's like, again, coming in with a rugby background and they want to put
Hmm.
put their forehead in your chest. Okay, well, that's a different response. So it's like all things, man. You got to read that situation. But generally speaking, the place that I train, part of the reason I love training there is like it's such a laid back attitude, like very, very serious but casual, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
There's a lot of really good guys that train there. There's some people that really take it seriously. They want to compete. They want to, go out and do these great things. But at the same time, it's very low key. If you're
A nice
looking
mix.
at that too. Yeah.
Well, next time that you're offline, you know, on something like the phone or whatnot, ask our friend Jomo to tell you a hazing story. He'll tell you a couple good ones. All right,
Okay.
so so I have to tell you, I did an experiment last night because I wanted to see if I had 4 slices of pizza and two
Mm,
M&M cookies, would I sleep well or would it negatively affect my sleep? Spoiler alert: I slept terrible.
yeah.
Body just felt like a furnace the entire night, and you know, I think I generally don't eat pizza. It's pizza night once a week, usually in our home, and I usually do something else. Yeah, because for a while, pizza just didn't treat me well, as I
Mm.
found out again last night. But I'm not sure if it's that the pizza doesn't treat me well, or when I have pizza, my body just goes, well, screw it. The night's a train wreck. So have a little bit of this and have a little bit of that, and then it spirals into something else. So I'm paying for that today. But I gotta pull a heavy deadlift today. So maybe it'll go my way.
Generations of powerlifters can't be wrong, Pat. Seems to be the strength athletes pre-workout of choice, or maybe just
Oh,
lifestyle of choice in many cases. But yeah,
and rightfully so. But for the show today, you had a topic that kind of was rolling around in the old duder's head. So what is it here?
yeah. Well, I was thinking. I believe we've touched on this topic from time to time, but I don't know if we've ever addressed it head on. And basically, it's this trope that comes up over and over and over again the longer you stick around CrossFit circles. And the thought process goes something like this: Hey, I get it. We want to train for quote unquote real life. I want my fitness to extend outside the walls of the gym. Fully on board for that. So why should I learn to do something like a snatch? Or
Hmm.
what utility is there to ever having to learn to walk on my hands? I'm never going to go through a scenario in my real life where I'm going to have to kick up and escape the bad guys upside down
Probably not.
through some sort of Mission Impossible like scenario. So why bother with some of these skills? And to me, I just think it's always good to reframe that for people. And I guess the baseline in my mind is that you should not reduce utility in training to an analog that happens exactly in real life. That's, I think, a mistake. And there's a whole category of movements that you could look at in the gym and say, yeah, I don't see this in my real life. That doesn't mean they're not worth pursuing. So that's kind of the topic.
I mean, I don't know what kind of life you're living, but all the time in real life, I find myself in situations where, in about the span of a minute, I have to jump 100 times off the ground about an inch and a half while spinning my hands and my wrists all
Yeah,
the time. I mean, it happens constantly. So
critical.
those have to be included in my training protocol. My life would just crumble.
Critical skill. Yeah, exactly. Well, that's great. So I the kind of short list that I had that immediately popped to mind. Double unders is on there for sure. You hear that often by people that are frustrated because they just can't get that skill down yet.
Well,
Well,
and also we sold our car and we got a boat. I row everywhere. Right?
right.
That's
Yeah.
all I do is row.
Yeah. Yeah. Rowing is one of those ones I think that people can you can get there a little bit easier mentally. But
Everyone loves a good rowboat.
yep, double unders is one. Uh, snatch, the full snatch is one of those things that often, and particularly people that are kind of detractors of a program like CrossFit, they'll say, why would the average person need to learn this skill? It's so complex, it's so difficult, it's so time consuming to get the technique down. Why bother?
Hmm.
Um, GHD sit ups is another one you hear.
Oh,
This
there's a
argument
classic.
like,
Yes.
yep. And really just about anything on the rings. So up to and including the muscle up. Most people look at the rings and, they get some inkling of a Olympic gymnast routine and they say, well, this is way beyond any sort of skill that I'll develop in this lifetime. So let's just throw that implement out completely. It's clearly not for me. So that was kind of the short list that I
I like
had.
it. I
Yeah.
like it. So there could be a couple avenues to go with this. Is number one, if we're going to say, are these, if CrossFit's all about functional movements, are these movements functional? And so that very easily leads into just what does functional actually mean. So that I think would be valuable to touch
Yeah.
on. And then that could help us throw out some movements, defend some movements, include some movements or whatever. So we'll define that.
Hmm.
And then the other part is maybe some of these movements we make a strong case that they are functional for whatever particular reason, right?
Sure.
Then it becomes okay, are they necessary or can you be fit without doing them? Does their exclusion, if you
Hmm.
had a fitness protocol that didn't involve snatching, are you now not fit and decrepit? And what does that mean? So we could kind of touch on the utility of them as well after we define functional. So, but maybe defining functional could be a good place to start. And
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
you're probably one of the top people in the world to give CrossFit's definition of what functional is, but to to throw this out there first, I went ahead and onto the old interwebs, just a regular, dictionary online, and said, what does the average Joe define as functional when we're not talking about it from a CrossFit strength and conditioning perspective? And it had two quick definitions for functional. Means of or having a special activity, purpose, or task relating to the way in which something works or operates. That's fine. I don't know if everyone doesn't really do it for me. The second definition I liked a lot, which was that functional means designed to be practical and useful rather than attractive. So something which is functional has utility and it's
Yeah.
practical. And I was like, that actually leads quite well. So that's the dictionary one.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you say that, both that I'm, somebody that can speak on CrossFit's definition and that the definition that you found speaks to utility. Because what I'm about to say, I think, kind of blends both of them together. Like if we go back to just kind of the level one, old school kind of Greg Glassman thinking around what it means to be functional, his definition had to do with the expression of power. So a functional
Hmm.
movement is unique in its ability to, as he put it, move large loads long distances quickly or produce power. And
Hmm.
that begs the question, well, compared to what? Well,
Yep.
compared to something that's less functional. So the old example that was always rolled out at the level ones and probably still is for good reason is the air squat versus something like, an adductor abductor machine at the gym or like a hamstring curl.
Hmm.
Yeah. Can the hamstring curl feel intense when you load that thing up and go for a bunch of reps? But absolutely. Is it going to have the same kind of systemic effect on the body that involves the cardiovascular system, a whole host of muscles moving through a full range of motion in concert with that coordination, as the air squat? No, it's not even close. And you can measure that and put something objective to it. And every time, the intensity that you can produce in the air squat is going to come out on top. So,
Hmm.
so by Greg's definition of what functional is, that's the real defining factor. Now,
It was. Let me pause
yeah,
you there, and don't let me lose my train of thought because
yeah,
it. like the irreducible component comes there as well. But I wanted to say, first of all, to whoever's watching or listening to this, if you agree or disagree with CrossFit's definition of functional, like, great. I genuinely don't care. Like, but I will say,
Sure.
like, at least in a world of total, be like, say what you will about the general tenets of CrossFit, at least it's an
At least
ethos,
it's an
right?
ego.
I mean, at least Greg drew a line in the sand and said, in a world where no strength and
Oh, it's
conditioning program is going to say what functional means, they're just going to say it nonstop. I'm going to list out some qualities that you either meet or you do. Wasn't that a beautiful? Didn't it work absolutely
killing
perfectly?
me. That was so good. Yeah.
I'm going to draw some lines in the sand. You want to attack me? Attack me. Here is what we're saying. Take it
Yeah.
or leave it. And God bless him for actually doing that. So, hey, if you don't like this, create your own darn list. But this was like one of the
Yeah.
first ones that actually said, this is what we believe, this is what we stand behind, and this is going to largely shape our movement selection and training. And it's like, that
Yeah.
was a big deal when it came out.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll jump on that as well and embellish that by saying, absolutely. I feel like most people, when they have a critique of something like this model that we're talking about, it's not because they have a different model that's better. It's because they don't like something about the model that they haven't considered or thought through. Or maybe it's just a legitimate difference of opinion, but it's not like they're comparing this alternative. They're just taking down that existing structure, which is very different. It's a very different
Hmm.
thing to do. But to kind of tie in your second point that you mentioned earlier about utility, that's where I think there's some unstated things that if I were to talk about CrossFit kind of, as it's moved through the ages, I think this is less discussed, but really critical. Functional movements have to have an element of transferability. To me, that's the real big one that it kind of goes understated. I think there's an inherent understanding of it, but it's not as overtly expressed. And so, what do I mean by that? Well, okay, you take a movement like the snatch. I think it's pretty clear by the definition of power output that the snatch is right up there. You want to put that on a 1 rep max basis, you want to
Hmm.
put it on a 4 reps basis. It's a very powerful expression of full body movement. There's no argument there. Where people want to nitpick about the snatch is that, well, I'm never going to find myself in a situation that requires me to lift something over my head where I receive it in a full squat and then stand it up. There's
Right,
looking
right.
for that real world analog that doesn't exist. And you're like, okay, fine, I don't care. You're right, that doesn't exist. But the transferability of that skill and that coordination and that positional awareness and the balance in concert with the power that you're producing is highly transferable to many other things that you'll do in your life, even if it's not an easy dotted line to connect them. And so, what
It,
do I
it,
mean
it
by
hits
that?
a lot of those 10 general physical skills.
Absolutely. And so, what do I mean by that? Well, even if you can't find that parallel that exists in real life, even if it's hard to draw a dotted line to say, I added 10 pounds to my snatch and this particular sweep I'm working on in jujitsu got better. It's going to be hard to draw that parallel. But it's going to be easy to look at it from the inverse. And what I mean by that is if I take somebody that can snatch 225 confidently, they can hit that overhead position in the bottom, take a look around, give you the nod, stand up confidently with it, and then, drop it and move on to the next rep. That's an individual that is showing you right there that not only are they strong across a huge range of
Hmm.
function and musculature, but they can channel that strength in a very coordinated way that gets things done. Now, if you have any question about whether that individual is going to have a hard time getting up off of the couch the next morning because of a lack of range of motion or a lack of physical capacity, it's crazy to
Right.
try to think about it that way. There's no way that somebody's going to make that mistake that says this person who snatches 225 is just incapable of the basics of life. They've, in fact, gone so far the other way that they can do these things that are seemingly superfluous. Their functional capacity is so good that they're way beyond those basics to the point that they can express them in ways that, like, to the average person, I mean, a 225 snatch is no joke. That's a really
Oh,
big accomplishment. Uh,
yes.
and particularly so when you get to somebody who's just, not even in the game, so to speak, of working out or taking care of themselves. That's like it's like alien levels of capacity at that point. So that transferability, I think, is the unspoken hero of some of these movements.
And I think if we had, you know, if we were having this discussion in real life in person, there was a small audience there, and you had both people who were supporters and not supporters of the methodology. The supporters would, of course, nod along politely. But maybe even the people who weren't supporters, given the example of the snatch, would be like, okay, like I can get that. Like, obviously, if you can snatch 100 kilos, the range of motion you have in your
Yeah.
joints is obviously wonderful. You're head to toe strong. You're coordinated. You're powerful. Like, okay, I get it. And I can see how, even if you don't have to snatch anything in real life, all of those components are going to treat you well in just life's tasks because being fit, fast, and strong and coordinated, like that makes sense. Um, but there's this violent hip extension, this quarter extremity movement. It's the midline demands. Okay, great. Well, I don't see any of those with like the double under. Like where's like if the detractors might say like that argument that you just made of this high power producing movement, this large loads, long distance quickly, like none of that translates over to this thing. So what the heck's the deal there?
Yeah, I'll lump that in with walking on your hands too, because I was
Sure.
thinking about this before we clicked on, and to me, this is one of those. You look at that again, another model from the classic kind of level one literature. That list of 10 physical skills, and on the bottom you've got the ones that are more neurological: accuracy, agility, balance, coordination. A little harder to define sometimes, especially if you're just looking for that specific skill transferability that may not exist in the real world. But the basic raw materials of having a little bit more hand-eye coordination is a really big deal. And the basics of learning some jump rope skills can vastly improve that in ways that some other things in the gym might not be able to emphasize quite as much. So for that reason, you've got some transferability there, even if it's harder to see. And walking on your hands, I was thinking about this, and I was like, okay, if we take that analogy of the snatch and we say somebody that has a really heavy snatch, they have like a super level of functional capacity. It's beyond what you would probably ever need. I think the hands, walking on your hands, is a similar example in the gymnastics category. So if we take something like vestibular ability, like just the ability of your body to kind of right itself and balance and track properly, most people that declines if you do nothing, like anything else physical in the body. But by pushing that skill out and challenging it in a way that now I'm upside down and I got to figure that out, and I got to transfer from being right side up to upside down multiple times and quickly. The person that can do that, even if they can't fully walk on their hands, but they can go from kicking up into a handstand and back down several times, and then several times with a high heart rate, and then several times mixed in with other technical things that they have to do, their level of vestibular development, I don't even know if that's the correct way to phrase it, but they're in no danger of getting dizzy from just standing up off the couch. I mean, head rush aside, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
Sometimes that happens, but I'm talking, they're not going to be subject to the same kinds of decline as the average person when it comes to balance and just the ability to track their normal motion across their environment. And so that's pretty huge, even though it seems, again, kind of like this outside skill. Man, the fact that you can do that and the fact that your body can regulate after an effort like that is a pretty huge physiological adaptation. And the way it manifests is in this specific skill, but it's a big deal and it's a lot of transferability to something that most people probably don't consider, especially when they're young, especially when they're not, thinking about the long-term effects of something like that.
I think that is one of the biggest ones, quite frankly, in my opinion. And it's one that you mentioned the younger thing that as the years have ticked on becomes more and more apparent to me. And I'm not at that age yet,
Sure.
but Father Time remains undefeated, right? And if you look at after a certain or in a certain decade of your life, what just takes down, I was going to say Americans, but probably people around the world, left and right, is just falls. And if you and most falls are like older folks tripping on things that are like an inch high, or when they just catch their toe or something mid stride and the ship starts to go over and they don't have the agility and coordination and reflexes to right the ship or brace themselves or any of that stuff. And while that might seem like a smaller one, just just right now, low power movements that don't seem functional, like the scales, like, doing front and back scales and things like that. That's not a high power movement in any way, shape, or form. And I watch my daughter at gymnastics walk up and down and forwards and backwards and on her toes on the balance beam. Walking on the balance beam is not a high power production movement in any way, shape, or form. But the immediate transference to balance and agility and just overall coordination that translates to every other aspect of life is through the roof. And so it's a low power, quote unquote non-functional. You're walking on your toes on a beam, like that doesn't happen very frequently, but the transference of what you get from that is through the roof. And I did a little poking around beforehand to put into technical terms things that I just knew were true. And you touched on, which was your brain and your central nervous system is just not, it's not a use it or lose it kind of a thing, but like everything else in your body, it's that musculature, like you have to stress the system, and stressing the system and challenging yourself provides really beneficial adaptation. And that's only more important as you get older. And you can do that through doing jujitsu, and you're stressing your brain's plasticity of trying to learn these new movement patterns. It's difficult, that's great. You could be trying to learn another language, or you can do it in the gym and stress your brain and your motor recruitment patterns and your central nervous system through trying to learn these pesky double unders, or learn to walk on your hands and whatnot. And there was like a handful, and I won't go down, there's paragraphs on each one of them, but the benefits that you receive from doing these not simple things, from doing challenging, technical, complicated things are: number one was massive central nervous system and neuromuscular adaptation. Number two, superior proprioception and body awareness, knowing,
Can I stop you right
okay,
there?
yeah,
Because
go right ahead.
it's interesting. You talked about falls and not having the coordination or agility to navigate these things in their environment. But it's unfortunate, but I've witnessed family members kind of go down this road as they've gotten older. And my observation is, of course, that's part of it. But my observation is that their perception of their environment has changed fundamentally. And so before they can even react to the situation, it's like their perception of what it takes to stand up over that thing in the way is fundamentally distorted because it is not in use anymore. So
Oh,
it almost,
yes.
and so that's what I think that that last point you just talked about is kind of driving at. It's like before you even get that chance to navigate the object, you're not perceiving it correctly because your spatial relationship isn't quite there yet. It's not as sharp as it used to be.
A hundred
It's a
percent.
completely different relationship you have with your environment. So
And
anyway, keep
and
going.
this is anecdotal, but like,
Yeah.
I obviously dabble in these things now in my, just when I walk into my garage for an hour, but I don't have a lifelong exposure being a high skill athlete. Like I didn't grow up like that. I would consider myself more of like
Yeah.
a grunt work individual. But I'm married to somebody who spent their life doing high skill stuff, former D1 gymnast. And just, anecdotally, after, watching my life and her life for, years and years and years, whether we're skiing or mountain biking or something, I've seen me fall and I've seen her fall. And I've seen both of those happen a lot. And you can tell which one of us can flawlessly and effortlessly do cartwheels and rolls and back handsprings and walk on the hands. And you can tell which one of us effortlessly cannot do those two things. Like it is just, and if there was on video, as embarrassing as it'd be for me, you'd be like, oh, yeah, it does look like if you expose yourself to these things regularly and they're just embedded in your DNA, heaven forbid, when something does catch you off guard, you still might go down, but it's gonna be way more graceful, which will probably result in less trauma of an impact than someone that just hits like a sack of just dead potatoes on the
Yeah.
ground. So,
Yeah.
um, so I would encourage that to everybody. And then the other just handful of things which doing complicated things transfer to, and you touched on this as well: brain plasticity, cognitive benefits, especially in adults, long-term tissue and joint resilience. And then a cool one I thought, which was maybe people don't think of all the time, which was the psychological and emotional payoff, which is exposing yourself and doing things which are maybe hard and scary. And now some people might be like, well, I don't consider a 24-inch box jump hard or scary. Plenty of people do. I don't consider kicking upside down against the wall hard and scary. Plenty of people do. Getting under heavy load, whatever it is. If you expose yourself to these things regularly, on top of all the nice physical benefits to your tissue and muscles and all that stuff, there is a certain amount of just resilience or being calm under pressure, and knowing that you have the ability to learn and do difficult things and not quit and not give up. So all of those are wrapped into not just doing simple things that you can shut your brain off and you don't have to think, and those are all wrapped into ingeniously, I might add, what we do when we walk in the garage and work out.
Yeah, for sure. And it's the other end of that is the confidence that one gains after they've gotten a little skill under their belt. Like you do navigate your environment a little bit differently, and you kind of forget about that if you're immersed in this long term. So it's hard to contrast that. But if you have somebody who started, especially later in life, and they don't have an athletic background, and now they're a year deep, 18 months deep, 2 years deep, the way that they navigate things physically is much different than it was at the beginning, even though they might not perceive it that way because now they're just so deep in.
Mhm.
Very apparent when you coach somebody through that process. You're like, dude, you're a different animal than when you step through the door. And it's not just because your deadlift is heavier. It's, there's something else going on there. One of the things I thought was really interesting too is that people understand this intuitively when you talk about examples in the older population. So, for example, learning to do a handstand when you're 8 years old, nobody's really like, yeah, you're happy for your kid or your niece or whoever. And it's cool and it's an accomplishment, but it's also kind of like, yeah, that's expected from a kid
Mhm.
that's involved in an activity like gymnastics at that age. Okay, now you take somebody who's 25 and they've never done gymnastics and they learn a handstand. You're like, okay, that's cool to learn that a little later in life. Still kind of to be expected. You're young, you're fit. You should, still generally be able to pick these things up and have the physicality to do it. Okay, let's go to 55 now, and you've never done a skill like that. Now people start turning their heads and like, whoa, hold on. You learned to do a handstand with no prior experience at 55. Okay, well, let's now go to 65 or 75.
Mhm.
The further you push that thought experiment out, the more the head gets turned with like, wait, what? You got a 70-year-old guy doing strict muscle ups? That's crazy. What are we talking about here? Why is that any more impressive? Well, because there's an internal understanding that those types of things decline so much, those types of things meaning coordination,
Absolutely.
accuracy, et cetera, that we just take it for granted. Everybody has internalized that that is just the case with an older and aging population. And of course, if you do nothing and don't pursue physical things, it's probably true. But if you keep them up over the years, it's quite the opposite. And that's what I think is like the biggest secret to the functionality of some of these things is like, all right, you learn to do a handstand in your 20s, and maybe you never really progressed the skill to be anything impressive, but you can kick up against the wall and hold a handstand at 25, 35, 45, 55,
Mhm.
75. You just maintain that skill throughout your entire life. You are leap years ahead of the average person in terms of proprioception, physical confidence in your environment, ability to react quickly to changes in, a dynamic environment, whatever it might be. Very different animal all of a sudden. All it had to do with is maintaining that base skill. And so if that's not something that's functional,
Mhm.
well, I kind of don't know what it is at that point. Even if you're right, you're never going to have to kick up upside down and escape from the bad guy. I get it.
There was a paragraph that I found that we've touched on some of these points, but I think it could be useful for people who maybe are trying to articulate this to other people if they find themselves in.
Sure.
If you find yourself in a debate with this with another person, run away from that person. Spend your time doing something else. Let nerds and like myself and Adrian do this. But um, we are often asked, if CrossFit prioritizes movements that generate high power output, why do we still incorporate other movements? The litmus test for these movements is their transferability to functional capacity. Most often, you will see such transfers with gymnastics movements. For example, the L-sit does not generate high power, but the reliance on your own body control in conjunction with the core strength developed will most certainly support one of the main features of functional movements, which is the ability to stabilize your trunk. So, a lot of these things, again, you've got the quick, great, elegant bullet points that Greg came up with. And one of the biggest ones is high power, large loads, long distances quickly. And then you say, well, that immediately disqualifies the L sit. Okay, yes, okay, gotcha. But here's why we also include movements like that, with an asterisk or a caveat, because they have such beautiful, incredible transference. So a lot of times, if you follow the bouncing ball there, you'll see why we're doing these things. And, and the last, unless you've got something else, the last thing I want to touch on was, um, do you need to do these things to be fit? So if somebody said, okay, gotcha, but I don't want to snatch. You know what I mean? I've been, whatever reason, I've been trying to learn double unders for 2 years. I still don't have them. And when I think about them, I get angry and don't want to work out. So I'm just not going to try to do them anymore. So, what's the negative effect of now? I'm not going to snatch. I'm not going to do double unders, for example.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's valid. And I
Or
think,
fill in your favorite, movement
yeah,
that you're not
I
going to
think
do.
the short answer is yes, you can still be plenty fit. Yes, you can still be a lot fitter than the average person. Academically, would you be quote unquote optimally fit by removing some of these things? Probably not. That's kind of an angels on a pinhead type discussion. It's going to be very difficult to quantify that. I'll say on the other side, though, to throw the academic argument out the window, because at the end of the day, I think people can just spiral around too much about that sort of thing. Uh, just think about who you would rather be.
Mm,
And 45, 55, 65, 75. Would you rather be the person that never developed that skill and can't do these things at the current age that you are now and therefore will not be able to do them in 20 years or 30 years? Or would you rather be the person that's like, man, I learned to do a double under in my 40s and then I just had that forever and I can
right.
rock out when I'm 70? Dude, I learned to do a muscle up in my late 30s and now I've got that skill forever. And guess
Hmm.
what? I'm 65, I can still do it. Who would you rather be? I know who I'd rather be.
And I think it's a sliding scale, right? Like it's not an all or nothing thing. And I would say wherever you are in the, you might never want to snatch again for the rest of your life because you find it so frustrating and you hate it. But you
Sure.
can do it, but you just hate it. It makes your life sour, so you shelf it.
Sure.
Um, or you could have blown your shoulder out and for something, and the snatch doesn't treat you well, but you can clean and jerk, okay? Because it's technically still complicated, but it's
Who
less
who would that
complex.
like, Pat? Surely
Yeah,
that's
exactly. I would still love to be able to clean and jerk. Can't you do that?
no, we're talking
But
hypothetically here, right?
like my point is, okay, you can't snatch, but you're gonna still clean and jerk. Well, holy cow. I mean, the
Right.
the clean
Yeah.
and jerk
Yes.
compared to what most people are doing for strength and conditioning is way near the top of the pyramid for
Yeah.
complexity. So I would say like wherever you are in the movements that you're choosing to include or you're going to exclude, whatever movement selection you still have, to the best of your ability, try to make sure that some of them you still find challenging. And so what I could even go like, okay, I'm this terrible CrossFitter. Like I hate GHDs. I just hate them. I'm not going to do them. I think they're stupid. I think snatching is stupid. I'm not going to do it. I think walking in my hands, I heard what Adrian said, but I'm never going to have to do it. It's stupid. I'm not going to do that. Muscle ups, I'm going to blow up my shoulder. Well, that's stupid. Okay, great. Well, then if you find yourself at 35, 45, or 55, and you've eliminated like those movements, maybe those are some common ones that people just tend to hate. I hate the sumo deadlift high pull. I'm not doing it. Great. Um, well, but you're still like squat cleaning, but most of your other
Yeah.
friends are just doing like, leg extension, leg curl, and you're doing squat cleans in your garage with like a 185-pound barbell. You are still exposing yourself to a level of technical complexity and stressing of your central nervous system orders of magnitude greater than your friend who's doing a bodybuilding routine. Orders of magnitude greater. And so I would say, still to the best of your ability, if your friend's doing, you think you're doing a simple program, your friend's doing the leg press and you're front squatting. Just the fact that you're front squatting a barbell in your garage is huge. And so keep as
Yeah.
much complexity as possible in your routine, given your ability, your body, your joints, your likes, your dislikes, like, because stressing the system is a good thing.
Yeah, for sure. And I just want to make it clear in the example that I gave, I certainly wasn't talking about somebody who's either just have preference against a certain movement or towards a certain movement, or life's dealt them a rough card and
Sure.
it's
Sure.
just not really feasible to pursue that movement anymore. That's totally different. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I'm talking about the person that's like, you know what, I can get the same benefit out of using the Smith machine. And it's like, no, you know what, you cannot.
100%.
That's the person that I am really kind of framing when I'm speaking to that. Last thing I'll say, and this is the last one that I really want to get in there. Um, and again, just kind of going back to this idea of adaptation and experience around adaptation. It's easy to start a weightlifting program and identify the adaptation in a couple of months. You're like, wow, the barbell weight was way heavier. When you start a flexibility program, maybe the process is slower, but you can see, hey, I started here and now I can move through this range of motion more easily than I did before. If there's objective progress. When it comes to things that are less easily observed, like balance, coordination, accuracy, it can be harder to take away some of those things. But I'll give you a real simple one that I think anybody who doubts this type of adaptability, give it the old college try. It doesn't take a lot of time. For 2 weeks, what you're going to do is you're going to find a stretch of carpet or something that's relatively kind of not, it doesn't need to be padded, but it shouldn't be concrete, a forgiving surface,
Yeah.
whatever. And you're going to teach yourself from all fours to just do a nice forward roll. I don't care if it's a pretty gymnastic style forward roll or like a martial arts kind of shoulder roll. It doesn't matter. The technique that you choose to learn is almost irrelevant. But what you're going to do once you've learned that basic technique and you're pretty comfortable with it is you're going to do 10 forward rolls in a row without stopping. That's it. It's not going to tax you too much physically. You're
I'm
not
gonna
going to.
vomit into the trash can.
Well, on day one, that could be a likely outcome. You're going to stand up and you're going to note what happens after 10 consecutive forward rolls with really no prior training, just some familiarity with the movement. Now, you're going to do that every day or every other day for about a 2 week period. And what you're going to do is just take note at what happens progressively over that period of time. Because I'm here to tell you that after that couple of week period, it might take a little longer, a little less, depending on your own ability to adapt. But there will come a point where you do that 10 forward rolls and you probably aren't even registering it at that point, where you stand up and you're not dizzy and you don't feel like you got to go sit down or grab onto the staircase for support or whatever. You probably won't even notice it because now you're just feeling normal. Well, that's
Hmm.
a huge adaptation if you compare that to where you started with that. And that is, again, all of a sudden your vestibular system is like, hey, I can regulate so much faster to the point where the individual doesn't even recognize that it's happening. But that's the benefit of something like that. And it's observable when you give yourself a specific way to see it. So that's my challenge to anybody who doubts that kind of adaptability of the human organism on that level. Start with the basic front roll, do it for a couple weeks in a row. Note the changes between day one and like day 20 or day 14 or 15. They're pretty profound in most people. So try it out.
Man, we should do some sort of like a reality show or something that like there's a cash prize where we stand outside the door of like Target or Walmart or something, and you just get the average Joe, just Johnny All American, right? 45 years old, has been inactive, sedentary, and you present them with whatever the appropriate amount of cash is to entice them. You get a little gymnastics mat there, and you say, "Look, we've mapped out 100 meters. You need to do two forward rolls and break into a 100-yard dash as fast as you can." Just have the ambulance standing by. But how many, myself included, come out of the second forward roll, just like run into the nearest parked car or something like that, just totally disoriented and dizzy. Hamstrings would be popping left and right. It'd be amazing. So, maybe we'll get some funding for that. But
Here's
yeah,
the
that would be, what's funny is I have to the simple forward roll, it's funny that you say that. I know that I would benefit from doing that. I know that I would. And it takes no time. I should probably just put 1 or 2 into my warm up every now and then
yeah,
when
it's all
when that doesn't get me dizzy, put 3 in. When that doesn't, and get to the point where if I could do 10, man, that would be like from where I am right now, me being able to do 10 forward rolls and not feel dizzy would be the equivalent to me working up to a 1,000-pound deadlift. Like, it seems, like, insurmountable right now, so I should probably do that.
it would happen faster than you think.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your positive energy as usual.
Hey, that's what I'm here for, Pat.
That's
Good vibes, as the kids say.
anything else on the topic?
No, but just saying that just makes me angry because I got into an argument with some youth that they're trying to claim that the term vibes is not a contraction of vibrations, which is absolutely insane to me. And now I'm all fired up about that. So maybe that's a good place to end the
Dude,
show.
the things have we've got 2 teenage boys, the terminology and the lingo that they come home with every week, I'll just be like, what does that mean?" And they'll have to explain it to me, and it's like, "Ah,
You have to
it's
get out your like old timey ear horns.
dude,
Say it again
it's
into my good ear.
it's it's pretty crazy." But hey, everybody, if you've got ideas for the show, we want to know what they are. You can find this show on the BTWB YouTube channel. Post your thoughts, comments, or ideas there. We'll check those out. You can go to the Very Not Random Instagram account. You can leave a public comment, or you can send a direct message if you want to be more anonymous. All those things make their way to us, and we appreciate it. So, for Adrian Bosman, I'm Pat Sherwood, and we will see you next time.